Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Spotlight 2015 Movie Review. Spotlight is a 2015 American biographical drama film directed by Tom McCarthy and written by McCarthy and Josh Singer. The film follows the Boston Globe's Spotlight team, the oldest continuously operating newspaper investigative journalist unit in the United States, and its investigation into a decades-long cover-up of widespread and systemic child sex abuse by numerous priests of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. Although the plot was original, it is based on a series of stories by the Spotlight team that earned the Globe the 2003 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service. The film features an ensemble cast including Mark Ruffalo, Michael Keaton, Rachel McAdams, John Slattery, Stanley Tucci, Brian Darcy James, Liev Schreiber, and Billy Crudup. Spotlight was shown in the out-of-competition section of the 72nd Venice International Film Festival, the Telluride Film Festival, and the special presentations section of the 2015 Toronto International Film Festival. It was released on November 6, 2015, by Open Road Films and grossed $98 million worldwide. It received widespread critical praise, with critics lauding the performances of the cast, historical accuracy, and screenplay. It won numerous Guilds and Critics Association awards, and was named one of the best films of 2015 by various publications. Spotlight won the Academy Award for Best Picture, along with Best Original Screenplay, from 6 total nominations, making it the first Best Picture winner since The Greatest Show on Earth, 1952, to win only one other Oscar. The film also won the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by a Cast in a Motion Picture. In 1976, at a Boston police station, 2 policemen discuss the arrest of Father John Geoghegan for child molestation. A high-ranking cleric talks to the mother of the victims, assuring her that Geoghegan will be removed from the parish. An assistant district attorney visits the precinct and tells the policeman to keep the arrest secret from the press. The mother declines to press charges and Geoghegan is quietly released. In 2001, Marty Barron, the incoming editor of the Boston Globe, meets Walter Robbie Robinson, the head of the newspaper's Spotlight investigative team. Barron seeks to make the paper essential to the community. After Barron reads a Globe article about a lawyer, Mitchell Garabedian, charging that Cardinal Bernard Law of the Archbishop of Boston knew about Geoghegan's sexual abuse of children and did nothing to stop it, Barron urges the Spotlight team to investigate. Journalist Michael Resendez contacts Garabedian, who initially declines to be interviewed. Though he is told not to, Resendez reveals that he is on the Spotlight team and persuades Garabedian to cooperate. The Spotlight team initially believes that they are following the story of one priest who was repeatedly reassigned to different parishes, but deduces that many other priests in Massachusetts have been similarly shuttled from parish to parish, suggesting a broader cover-up. With advice from Phil Saviano, who heads the victims' rights group Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, SNAP, the team widens their search to 13 priests. Richard Sipe, a psychotherapist who used to treat sexually abusive priests referred to him by the church, estimates that there are roughly 90 abusive priests in Boston, 6% of priests. The team develops a list of 87 names and conducts interviews with many of their victims. As the team realizes the sheer scale of the investigation, it begins to take a toll on their lives. Matt Carroll learns that near his home, the Archdiocese quietly maintains a facility that houses and psychologically treats abusive priests, but to avoid spoiling the story, he cannot tell his neighbors. Sasha Pfeiffer finds herself unable to attend church with her grandmother. Resendez pushes to get the story out quickly to prevent rival newspapers from preemptively publishing under-researched work that the Archdiocese can explain away, and Robinson's network of affluent Catholic friends pressures him to compromise the investigation to protect the church. When the September 11 attacks occur, the team is forced to temporarily deprioritize their investigation. Garabedian informs Resendez that there are publicly available court documents tying the cover-up to Cardinal Law himself, including a letter from Bishop John Michael Darcy warning Law of Geoghegan's abuse. At Barron's direction, Robinson urges the team to continue researching the case, emphasizing that law can write off anecdotal priests as bad apples and that the church's systematic cover-ups must be exposed. After a judge grants the Globe's motion to unseal more legal filings supporting the existence of a cover-up, the Spotlight team finally begins to write the story, which is scheduled for January 2002. Before the story runs, Robinson confesses that in 1993, before he joined the Spotlight team, plaintiff's attorney Eric McLeish gave him a list of 20 sexually abusive priests, but he ran only a minor story and never followed up. He did not remember the list until Spotlight began investigating the archdiocese. Barron acknowledges that reporters do not always get it right and commends Robinson and his team for exposing the crimes now. The story runs with a web link to the documents exposing Law's cover-up and a hotline for victims of abusive priests. The next morning, the team is inundated with calls from victims coming forward to tell their stories. A textual epilogue notes that Law resigned in December 2002 and was eventually promoted to the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, and presents a list of 105 U.S. communities and 101 others around the world where major scandals involving abuse by priests have taken place. The film was written by Tom McCarthy and co-writer Josh Singer. When McCarthy was asked how he and his co-author tackled the research and writing process, he said, "As I said, I turned down the film the first time. That's probably some indication of how intimidating it was. But I think, as always, with any big assignment, once you get over that initial shock and awe of how much material there was to cover, you start digging into the material and become really fascinated by and engaged with it, and we did. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was exciting work. It was really interesting work, parsing through details of not just the investigation, but its findings, and trying to determine what was most helpful in telling our story. I think having two brains on it was somewhat helpful too, because we could talk through it a lot. So it wasn't just sitting alone in a room and jotting notes. We were dialoguing a lot about it. That particular collaboration did feel investigative and on some level, seemed to parallel some of the collaboration of the reporters in that investigation. So, I think there was something about our collaboration that made that initial process more palatable on some level." McCarthy and Singer completed the script in June 2013. It was on the 2013 blacklist of unproduced screenplays. Singer told Creative Screenwriting that one of his goals for the film was to highlight the power of journalism, which he feels has been waning. He explained, "This story isn't about exposing the Catholic Church. We were not on some mission to rattle people's faith. In fact, Tom came from a Catholic family. The motive was to tell the story accurately while showing the power of the newsroom, something that's largely disappeared today. This story is important. Journalism is important, and there is a deeper message in the story." Bryan Cranston was offered an unspecified role, but turned it down due to scheduling conflicts with The Infiltrator, 2016. He later expressed regret for turning it down. Principal photography began on September 24, 2014, in Boston, Massachusetts, and continued in October in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Filming took place at Fenway Park, the then current Boston Globe offices in Dorchester, Boston, the Boston Public Library, and McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. The film's editor Tom McArdle said of the post-production process, "We edited for 8 months. We just wanted to keep refining the film. We cut out 5 scenes plus some segments of other scenes. Often we would just cut out a line or two to make a scene a little tighter." The Boston police station depicted in the opening scene was filmed in Toronto at the former Toronto Police Service 11 Division Station at 209 Mavety Street, and the former Sears building on Islington Avenue in Toronto was converted into a replica of the interior of the old Boston Globe, where the bulk of the filming took place. The brief scene in which Resendez watches a children's church choir perform Silent Night was filmed in St. Basil's Church, Toronto, a Roman Catholic church on the University of Toronto campus. The film premiered to sustained applause at the Venice Film Festival, and the audience erupted in laughter when the film reported that following the events in the film Cardinal Bernard Law was reassigned to a senior position of honor in Rome. It had a limited release on November 6, 2015, with its US release scheduled for 3 weeks later on November 25. Spotlight was released by Universal Studios Home Entertainment on DVD and Blu-ray in the United States on February 23, 2016. Spotlight grossed $45.1 million in the United States and Canada and $53.2 million in other countries for a worldwide total of $98.3 million, against a production budget of $20 million. The Hollywood Reporter calculated the film made a net profit of up to $10 million. In the opening weekend of its limited release, the film grossed $295,009 from 5 theaters, $59,002 average, one of the highest per-screen averages of any release of 2015. The film grossed $4.4 million in the first weekend during its wide release, finishing 8th at the box office. Spotlight received widespread critical acclaim. The review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes gave the film an approval rating of 97% based on 383 reviews, with an average rating of 8.8/10. The website's summary of the critical consensus is that Spotlight gracefully handles the lurid details of its fact-based story while resisting the temptation to lionize its heroes, resulting in a drama that honors the audience as well as its real-life subjects. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 93 out of 100, based on 45 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Variety's Justin Chang called the film a superbly controlled and engrossingly detailed account of the Boston Globe's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation into the widespread pedophilia scandals and subsequent cover-ups within the Catholic Church. Joe Morgenstern of the Wall Street Journal wrote, "To turn a spotlight fittingly on Spotlight, it's the year's best movie so far, and a rarity among countless dramatizations that claim to be based on actual events." Mark Kermode of The Guardian gave it 4 out of 5 stars and praised Ruffalo's performance, writing, "As for Mark Ruffalo, he's the closest thing this ensemble cast has to a star turn, a long-suppressed outburst of emotion providing one of the film's few grandstanding showstoppers." Helen O'Hara of Empire gave the movie 4 out of 5 stars and called it a grown-up film about serious people that mercifully escapes any awards-grabbing platitudes and more thrilling than most action movies. Richard Propes of The Independent Critic gave Spotlight 4 out of 4 marks and praised the screenplay and cast. Spotlight is a nearly perfect example of what happens when the perfect filmmaker works with the perfect script and acquires the perfect cast and crew to bring a story to life. At the 2015 Toronto International Film Festival, Spotlight finished third in the audience balloting for the People's Choice Award. Comparing Spotlight to The Post, a similar period film about journalists, critic Matt Zoller cites of RoachRebert.com expressed perplexity over critics' muted praise for the latter film, writing that in terms of direction, Spotlight got praise for doing a tenth of what Steven Spielberg does here. In 2025, it ranked number 66 on the New York Times list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century and number 73 on the Reader's Choice edition of the list. In general, the film was positively received by the Catholic community. Before its release, Cardinal Sean O'Malley of the Archdiocese of Boston issued a statement in the Archdiocese's official newspaper, stating that the media's investigative reporting on the abuse crisis instigated a call for the Church to take responsibility for its failings and to reform itself to deal with what was shameful and hidden. O'Malley had not seen the movie at that time but planned to do so. On November 9, 2015, a review in the Catholic News Service called the film a generally accurate chronicle of the Boston scandal, but objected to some of the portrayals and the film's view of the Church. On the Catholic News Service, Auxiliary Bishop of Los Angeles Robert Barron said that it is not a bad movie, as it shows how the wider community shares the responsibility for sexual abuse committed by priests, but that the film is wrong to insinuate that the Church has not reformed. Vatican Radio, the official radio service of the Holy See, called it honest and compelling, and said it helped the U.S. Catholic Church to accept fully the sin, to admit it publicly, and to pay all the consequences. Luca Pellegrini on the Vatican Radio website wrote that the Globe reporters made themselves examples of their most pure vocation, that of finding the facts, verifying sources, and making themselves for the good of the community and of a city paladins of the need for justice. In February 2016, a Vatican City Commission on Clerical Sex Abuse attended a private screening of the film. Following the film's Best Picture win at the Oscars, Vatican newspaper L'Osservatore Romano ran a column assuring that it is not an anti-Catholic film, and Vatican Radio revealed that clerics in Rome have been recommending the film to each other. A January 7, 2016, article in the New York Times cited author David F. Pierre Jr., who said that Spotlight is a misrepresentation of how the Church dealt with sexual abuse cases, asserting that the movie's biggest flaw was its failure to portray psychologists who had assured church officials that abusive priests could be safely returned to ministry after undergoing therapy treatments. Open Road Films rebutted the detractor, saying he was perpetuating a myth in order to distract from real stories of abuse. Jack Dunn, played by Gary Golin, the public relations head and a member of the board at Boston College High School, criticized the film for portraying him as callous and indifferent to the scandal. Dunn says he was immediately aware of the issues involved and worked to respond after viewing the film. Two of the Globe reporters depicted in the film, Walter Robinson and Sasha Pfeiffer, issued a statement in response to Dunn, firmly standing by their recollections of the day, that Dunn did his best to frame a story in the most favorable way possible for the institution he is representing. That's what Jack did that day. They said Dunn mounted a spirited public relations defense of Boston College High School during our first sit-down interview at the school in early 2002, the scene in which Dunn is depicted. On March 15, 2016, Open Road Films released a statement on how Dunn was portrayed in the film. As is the case with most movies based on historical events, Spotlight contains fictionalized dialogue that was attributed to Mr. Dunn for dramatic effect. We acknowledge that Mr. Dunn was not part of the archdiocesan cover-up. It is clear from his efforts on behalf of the victims at BC High that he and the filmmakers share a deep, mutual concern for victims of abuse. Dunn then also released a statement, "I feel vindicated by the public statement and relieved to have the record set straight on an issue that has caused me and my family tremendous pain. While it will never erase the horrific experience of being falsely portrayed in an Academy Award-winning film, this public statement enables me to move forward with my reputation and integrity intact." Spotlight has been critically acclaimed, and has been included in many critics' top 10 films of 2015 lists. The film has received over 100 industry and critics awards and nominations. The American Film Institute selected Spotlight as one of the top 10 films of the year. The film garnered 3 Golden Globe Award nominations for Best Motion Picture, Drama, Best Director for McCarthy, and Best Screenplay for McCarthy and Josh Singer. It was nominated for 5 Independent Spirit Awards, including Best Feature, Best Director, Best Screenplay for Singer, Best Editing for Tom McArdle, and Honorary Robert Altman Award for the cast. Rachel McAdams and the ensemble cast received nominations for the Outstanding Performance by a Female Actor in a Supporting Role and the Outstanding Performance by a Cast in a Motion Picture respectively, with the cast winning the latter. The New York Film Critics Circle awarded Michael Keaton the Best Actor Award, while it won the Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay and Best Ensemble Cast at the New York Film Critics Online Awards. Spotlight won the Best Film and Best Screenplay from the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. It received 8 nominations from the Broadcast Film Critics Association, including Best Film, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Screenplay and Best Score. It won the Best Cast in a Motion Picture at Satellite Awards and was nominated for 6 other awards including Best Film, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Supporting Actress and Best Original Screenplay. At the Academy Awards, the film received 6 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Ruffalo, Best Supporting Actress for McAdams, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Film Editing, winning Best Picture and Best Original Screenplay. It is the first Best Picture winner to win fewer than 3 Academy Awards since 1952's The Greatest Show on Earth, and the last Best Picture winner to date to not win Best Director or any for acting. At the time of its win, the film had made $39.2 million at the North American box office, which made it the second lowest domestically grossing film, adjusted for ticket price inflation, to win Best Picture within the past 4 decades, after The Hurt Locker with $17 million. It was also voted the 88th greatest film since 2000 in an international critics poll conducted by BBC. In 2018, IndieWire writers ranked its screenplay the 12th best American screenplay of the 21st century, with Kate Erbland saying that the script ticks along so well, not cutting any corners when it comes to the nitty-gritty of real-world reporting, while also finding time to develop its characters and tell a banger of a story. It hits the right beats, but it does so in earned ways, rooted in realism. In 2021, members of Writers Guild of America West, WGAW, and Writers Guild of America East, WGAE, ranked its screenplay 31st in UGA's 101 greatest screenplays of the 21st century, so far. The church, by definition, is a sacred thing. Holy. Its very buildings reflect that hallowed call, cathedrals built in the shape of crosses, steeples that point to heaven. Those inside are thought to be the hands and feet of God Himself, serving as His reflection in this fallen, fractured world. But while God's church is sacred, its churches can be less so. Those who fill sanctuaries are products of the world, too. Broken and battered. Sometimes evil slithers under the door, tainting classrooms and pulpits, defiling the very altar of our faith. Our priests and pastors and leaders can fail. Our shepherds can turn into wolves. It's hard to imagine a more powerful institution in Boston than the Catholic Church in 2001. People innumerable turn to the spiritual leaders there for help and solace, for peace and friendship. Through the diocese and its charities, thousands of people are fed and clothed, educated, and spiritually nurtured. Wayward priests? Well, they're usually shuffled off elsewhere. And when one of those priests, John Geoghegan, arrives in court, accused of molesting young boys, his circumstance draws sparse coverage from the Boston Globe. But even if the Globe does get interested in following the story, it'll be difficult to do. Whatever the diocese knows of Geoghegan's behavior is sealed from prying eyes. Then the Globe brings in Marty Baron as its new editor-in-chief, and he suggests that the paper's journalists might want to poke around a bit more. Perhaps the Catholic Church knows more about Geoghegan and other pedophilic priests than it's admitting. And Baron wonders whether Spotlight, a small division of Globe investigative journalists who dig into potential stories for months at a time, might be the appropriate team to handle it. Spotlight would. And it eventually shows the world that, while the church may be sacred, those who fill it and lead it can be anything but. Spotlight, the movie, makes for difficult viewing, particularly for those who hold priests and cardinals and the Catholic Church itself in high regard. Indeed, the real-life scandal on which Spotlight is based is a difficult story for many Christians to acknowledge. But as painful as it is, it's absolutely right to laud those who brought the outrage into the open. Secrets like these need to be exposed, as Luke 8:17 reads, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." The journalists covering the story, Robbie, Sasha Pfeiffer, Mike Resendez, and Maddie Carroll, worked tirelessly to bring those hidden things to light. It takes months of groundwork, annoying persistence, and a willingness to confront. It's discomforting for the diocese to be thrown into the role of a villain here, as it pushes the journalists to just go along to get along. But these men and women refuse to do so, and I'd like to think that the whole of the Christian church is healthier today because of their diligence and doggedness. Faith and religion are, of course, huge components in Spotlight. Throughout the movie, the power of the diocese is emphasized by massive cathedrals looming over seemingly every outdoor interview. Cardinal Bernard Francis Law is clearly one of Boston's most powerful leaders, speaking of God's love on national television in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, interacting with politicians and power brokers, hosting a customary sit-down with the new editor and giving him a welcome gift of a Catholic catechism. It's a guide to the city of Boston, Law says. The message and even implied threat is resounding: the Archdiocese of Boston is not an institution to be trifled with. The priests themselves were equally powerful in their own right. When a priest asks a young boy, a victim of abuse, to gather up hymnals, the lad says, "It's like God asking for help." Indeed, boys and girls were flattered and honored when a priest would show them extra attention. And when that attention became criminally inappropriate, confused children would rationalize it or excuse it. "How do you say no to God, right?" one victim says. All the Spotlight reporters say they're lapsed Catholics. Matty now attends a Presbyterian church, while Sasha says she sometimes attends Mass with her deeply religious Nana. But the story takes a toll on even this modicum of faith. Sasha says later she can't go to Mass anymore. She looks at the priest and simply grows too angry. Mike says he left the Catholic Church as a teen, but always imagined himself returning to the fold. Now, the idea of going back is unthinkable. They knew, and they let it happen, he exclaims. To kids. But while Spotlight is unflinching in its criticism of the Archdiocese of Boston in particular and the Catholic Church as a whole, at least one character one only heard on the phone says he still considers himself Catholic. "The Catholic Church is made of men," he says. "But the Church, the real Church, is eternal." We hear that Cardinal Law once called the power of God down upon the globe, and how a week later the editor broke his leg while skiing. The first exposé is published on the Feast of Epiphany. Seems appropriate, someone says. We hear children singing Silent Night. The first Spotlight story suggests that at least 70 priests were involved in sexual abuse. The journalists suspect as many as 87, in line with predictions from a former priest who studied the presence of pedophilia in the priesthood. He alleges that 6% of priests abuse children, which would put the number of abusive priests in Boston at 90. This expert also insists that, despite their vows of celibacy, only 30% of priests are completely chaste. While interviewing a victim, Sasha tells him that he needs to be very specific about what happened. Euphemisms like molested won't cut it. As a result, the interviews, which we observe, can be both disturbing and crude. We hear briefly about oral and anal sex, amatory touching and strip poker games, all perpetrated upon minors. Many victims break into tears. One admits he's never even told his wife about the abuse. One effeminate victim says he's gay, and that the priest was the first person who told him it was okay. One priest confesses to Sasha that he fooled around with young boys, but says there was no harm in it and that he didn't get any sexual gratification from it. He adds that he was raped himself, so he should know what rape looks like. We hear that some victims took their own lives as a result of the abuse. One man says a priest began his advances on him just after my dad killed himself. We learn that many victims turned to alcohol or drugs after the abuse, and one man's arms are covered with needle scar track marks. Several ancillary characters smoke whiskey, wine, and beer is consumed with one guy, while drinking beer at a Red Sox game, quipping that drinking is a great way to deal with the game. Some priests would ply their targets with alcohol, we're told. The pedophilic priest scandal was not limited to Boston. Slides at the end of the movie document many of the larger communities where abuses have occurred, and offending priests, instead of being charged in a court of law or, at the very least, booted out of the priesthood, were instead moved to other dioceses, where many went on to abuse again. When I was a reporter for a daily paper in Colorado Springs, I had opportunity to interview victims of priestly abuse. 3 brothers, the oldest first victimized when he was 8 years old. They were in their 50s and 60s when I talked with them, and they still struggled with the aftermath. Only one of the brothers claimed to still be a Christian. The abuse detailed in Spotlight sounded so familiar, so true, how the kids were almost awed to be the focal point of a beloved religious leader, how they were systematically groomed, how confused they were when the relationship turned sexual. These coercive elements of power and faith make Spotlight a challenging, troubling movie, hard to watch, hard to get out of your mind. It sticks with you, as well-told stories do. As shocking stories do. It's a horrific reminder of the evil that people can do. Any people. Spotlight has its content issues, many of which are, sadly, integral to its central story. And it is undoubtedly a vehicle that will cause doubt among the faithful, disdain among those looking in from the outside. The sexual scandal revealed in part by the Spotlight team at the Boston Globe is, with certainty, a roadblock to religion for many. It was for the reporters who covered it, for many of the victims who lived it, for some who simply read and watched the story from afar. And it will be a roadblock for some moviegoers, too. This is not a film that encourages us to embrace the spiritual richness found in the churches around us. Instead, it encourages deep skepticism about how God's plan for His people can ever be realized in a world so full of sin. But maybe that skepticism is good. Even wise. The Bible itself shows us many a fallen leader, many a hypocrite. None of those wayward souls diminished the light that is Christ. And if we are honest, we will realize that what we see in Spotlight is a mess of humanity's making, not God's. As with so many movies drawn from controversial real-life events, any attempt at damage control by the organization under scrutiny could merely wind up boosting the film's commercial and cultural profile when Open Road releases it November 6 stateside. As such, Catholic officials might be disinclined to take up arms against Spotlight as vocally as they did with Philomena, 2013, which invited legitimate criticism with its cartoonishly villainous Irish nuns and other dramatic liberties. McCarthy's picture is all the more authoritative for its comparative restraint, perhaps realizing the number of different ways they could have tackled a narrative of this density. The director and his co-writer, Josh Singer, The Fifth Estate, have shrewdly limited themselves to the journalist's perspective, ensuring that everything we learn about the scandal comes to us strictly through the Globe's eyes and ears. There are no triumphant, lip-smacking confrontations here, no ghoulish rape flashbacks or sensationalistic cutaways to a sinister clerical conspiracy behind closed doors. There is only the slow and steady gathering of information, the painstaking corroboration of hunches and leads, followed by a sort of slow-dawning horror as the sheer scale of the epidemic comes into focus. When a reporter notes that he'd love to see the looks on the faces of Cardinal Bernard Law, Len Cariou, and other Boston Archdiocese officials, it's a measure of the film's rigor that it refuses to oblige. The sole exception to this ground rule is the prologue, set on a wintry 1976 night at a Boston police station, where a priest named Father John Geoghegan is briefly held and then quietly released into the hands of the Archdiocese. 27 years later, in July 2001, the horrific consequences of that incident have been brought to light, with allegations that the Naughty Frock Geoghegan molested more than 80 young boys during his time in the priesthood. The Globe runs a few stories but little follow-up, until newly hired top editor Marty Barron, Liev Schreiber, who's determined to bring a new urgency to the newspaper's coverage and boost its local impact, turns the beat over to Spotlight, a four-person investigative team led by editor Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton. The search proceeds slowly but on multiple fronts. Hard-headed reporter Michael Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, works doggedly to secure the cooperation of Mitchell Garabedian, a spry Stanley Tucci, the notoriously larger-than-life lawyer who's representing 86 plaintiffs in the Geoghegan case, and also to unseal sensitive documents that the church has successfully buried until now. Another Spotlight writer, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, digs into abuse claims that have been filed against other local priests, interviewing victims and cornering top attorney Eric McLeish, Billy Crudup, Slick, whose own attempts to hold the church to account have done little to keep them from, in Robinson's words, turning child abuse into a cottage industry. That thread is pursued still further by reporter Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James, who discovers an ingenious method of tracing those pedophile priests whose ongoing offenses were not only known but actively enabled by the archdiocese, usually by sending them to treatment centers before reassigning them to new parishes, where they were free to prey upon children anew. Working with Ace DP Masanobu Takayanagi, McCarthy directs in a clean, fluid style as he traces the story from the Boston Globe newsroom, the camera often following staffers through the corridors in lengthy tracking shots, to the city's low-income margins, where priests reliably went after the most vulnerable kids they could find. As the investigation grinds on for months, with Howard Shore's score busily marking the passage of time in the background, Robinson and his team realize their job is not just to expose a few bad apples. At least 87 priests in the Boston area may be offenders, enough to qualify as a genuine psychiatric phenomenon, but also to prove the existence of a systemic cover-up at the highest levels of church, one that goes beyond cardinal law and extends into the very heart of the Vatican itself. The question becomes not just what to publish but when to publish, as the reporters must figure out how to write the most commanding piece they can before they're scooped by the competition or before word leaks back to the church itself, which is well equipped to fight a public relations war, especially in Boston. Even without the on-screen presence of Globe deputy managing editor Ben Bradley Jr. John Slattery, whose father famously steered the Washington Post through Watergate, All the President's Men would be the obvious touchstone here. Like so many films consumed with the minutiae of daily journalism, Spotlight is a magnificently nerdy process movie, a tour de force of filing cabinet cinema, made with absolute assurance that will be held by scene after scene of people talking, taking notes, following tips, hounding sources, poring over records, filling out spreadsheets, and having one door after another slammed in their faces. When the Spotlight investigation is temporarily halted in the wake of 9/11, we're reminded that the film is also a period piece, set during a time when print journalism had not yet entered its death throes. Like the American remake of State of Play, in which McAdams also played a journalist, McCarthy's film includes a loving montage of a printing press, busily churning out the next morning's edition, a valedictory sequence that may move old-school journalists in the audience to tears. The story's news-gathering focus ultimately creates a level of distance from its subject that works both for the film and against it. As information system dramas go, Spotlight doesn't have the haunting thematic layers of Zodiac, and it never summons the emotional force of the 1991 miniseries The Boys of St. Vincent, still the most devastating docudrama ever made about child abuse within the Catholic Church. Many of the victims depicted here, like Phil Saviano, Neil Huff, head of a local survivors group, and Joe Crowley, Michael Cyril Creighton, who movingly recalls his treatment at the hands of a priest named Paul Shanley, function in a mostly expository manner, offering up vital but fleeting insights into the psychology of the abusers and the abused, but without taking pride of place in their own story. Where the film proves extraordinarily perceptive is in its sense of how inextricably the church has woven itself into the very fabric of Boston life, and how it concealed its corruption for so long by exerting pressure and influence on the city's legal, political, and journalistic institutions. Given the blurrier than usual separation of church and state, and the fact that the newspaper's own readership includes a high percentage of Irish Catholics, it's no surprise that it falls to an outsider like Barron, a Florida native and the first Jewish editor to take the helm at the Globe, to play hardball with the archdiocese. If there's anything that keeps Spotlight from devolving into a simplistic heroic Crusaders movie, it's the filmmaker's refusal to let the Globe itself off the hook, pointing out the numerous times the paper's leaders glossed over reports of abuse that landed on their doorstep. As he demonstrated in films like The Station Agent and The Visitor, McCarthy has always had a nicely understated touch with actors, and his ensemble here is a model of low-key excellence. The heftiest roles go to Keaton, who presents Robinson as a flawed but strong, soul-searching leader, and Ruffalo, whose passionately committed Resendez gets to display the most energy and emotional range, including one of the film's few excessively histrionic moments. McAdams imbues Pfeiffer with sensitivity and grit, while Darcy James brings understated shadings to Carol, a hard-working family man who's alarmed to learn that a suspected perpetrator is living in his neighborhood. Slattery, Tucci, and Schreiber all shine in small yet vital roles, while the cast also includes sharp work by Jamie Sheridan and Paul Guilfoyle as two church-connected friends who try to talk Robinson down from his publish or perish stance. We recognize them immediately and perhaps a bit of ourselves as members of a great swath of decent yet compromised humanity, the proverbial good men who do nothing and allow evil to flourish. I've always been a sucker for movies with journalism at their center. I like all kinds of them, the character-driven dramas and especially the more focused procedurals. For years Hollywood has enjoyed using journalism as a means of telling numerous kinds of stories. Many have been fantastic films while others, not so much. The latest journalism picture sets us down in the world of investigative reporting. It is Thomas McCarthy's Spotlight, an absorbing newsroom drama about a Boston Globe investigative team's discovery of child sexual abuse by Catholic priests. The story goes even further by following the team's uncovering of an elaborate and disgusting cover-up by the Boston Archdiocese. The film is inspired by the true story of the Globe's Spotlight unit who in 2001 exposed the abuse and cover-up, eventually winning a Pulitzer Prize for their work. McCarthy also co-wrote the script, which notably doesn't feature a true lead performance. This serves the story well. Spotlight is a full-on ensemble picture built around several key characters and represented by some of the best performances of the year. The ever-entertaining Michael Keaton plays Walter Robbie Robinson, who heads the Globe's four-person Spotlight team. His team consists of the fervent, high-strung Michael Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, the tireless Ohio transplant Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, and the seasoned Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James. It's a tight-knit and semi-autonomous group who determine their own investigations and are given all the time and resources needed. That appears to change when, amid potential company cuts, the Globe brings in a Boston outsider, Marty Baron, Liev Schreiber. Feeling there is an important story to be told, the new boss immediately pulls Spotlight off their current project and has them investigate alleged child abuse among local priests. Their trail winds back several years, implicating more priests and revealing more victims. Spotlight is a painstaking procedural more focused on credible detail than big, showy moments. There is no pomp or pageantry. McCarthy is far more interested in examining the journalistic process than standard issue newsroom cliches. Everything he presents is done so with the utmost realism. You truly get a sense that you are watching an investigative process in motion. It may be the energy of the newsroom, much of which was shot in the Boston Globe offices, or something as simple as digging through old news clippings, making phone calls, or examining old records. But there is an incredible balance within the film. It is a journalism procedural, but there is also the serious and unsettling story we witness being uncovered. Spotlight handles this prickly subject deftly and earnestly. It pulls no punches while at the same time respectfully representing the victims. Even in these moments, the movie avoids the temptation to go big. It maintains a consistent level of restraint both from the actors and the director. And not enough can be said about the performances. Keaton and Ruffalo are flawlessly in tune with their characters. Liev Schreiber may be the biggest surprise, delivering a clever minimalist performance. John Slattery even dials it back as the paper's deputy editor. And Stanley Tucci is fabulous as an attorney on the wrong side of the church due to his unsuccessful crusade against clerical molesters. Tucci is an actor known to go big, but even he is more concerned about serving the story than his character. It's something the entire cast shares. Ironically, the film is titled Spotlight, yet a spotlight is something no one involved seeks. Whether you're talking about the director or a cast member, everyone seems more interested in the story being told. That chemistry allows for the film to center its focus on smart, meticulous storytelling. McCarthy's film is subtly thrilling and it flows at such an invigorating pace. Better yet, it doesn't hold our hand or insinuate we need every narrative beat explained for us. And in the end, there is no chest-pounding or lofty hero statuses. Just a stinging indictment that reaches beyond the church. As one character says, there is enough blame to go around. The Spotlight team ran a series of revealing articles that had a profound impact throughout Boston and beyond. It was true journalism at its purest during what could be called the last great age of the newspapers. Spotlight the movie is a worthy tribute to the important work done by that team. It also happens to be one of the best films of 2015 and easily one of the best films about journalism itself. Boston, 1976, at the District 11, Dorchester, Police Station. We hear of an assistant district attorney, an arrangement, little boys in a room are making crayon drawings, two priests leave the station house and enter into the back of a car that drives away quickly on the icy streets. The opening scene of Spotlight sets the tone for Tom McCarthy's astutely paced newsroom thriller, edited rigorously by longtime collaborator Tom McCardle, the station agent, the visitor, and Win-Win. Fast forward to 2001 and the Boston Globe is expecting a new editor-in-chief to arrive from the outside. Speculation about more staff cuts spreads throughout the newsroom. Following a long walk through corridors of the no-nonsense offices with reporter Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, who has never been better, carrying a slice of goodbye cake for a retiring colleague, we reach the movie's belly of the whale, the daily newspaper's Spotlight team. Mike Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, all shoulders and fringe, resembling a hyper-Franciscan monk, and Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James, wonderfully mild-mannered, sit behind their desks, next to Sasha, in front of Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton, more brittle and daring than a mere birdman, whose office has an open door. The former Miami Herald executive editor Marty Barron, a very convincing Liev Schreiber, arrives without much introduction or fanfare to take over. After an informal chat with deputy managing editor Ben Bradley Jr., John Slattery, understatedly impeccable, he shrewdly plays it low-key by next setting up a meeting with Spotlight leader Robbie at a restaurant to discuss his role with the paper. Robbie informs Barron that his team usually takes 2 years to research before they are ready to publish a story and notices that his new editor may find that length of time expendable. In a newsroom filled with reporters who were raised Catholic and are now in varying stages of commitment to their faith, Barron, who is Jewish and not part of the fabric of Boston society, wants to reinvestigate the allegations of child abuse against the Catholic Church. Being an outsider, he lacks the sense of intimidation that comes with years of grooming by what is considered acceptable power dynamics. He chooses the Spotlight team to move forward on tackling the intricate cover-up system in place to hide the child abuse committed by Catholic priests over many years and the eventual settlement payouts by the Church. The toll the investigation takes on their private lives begins to mount up. To expose a powerful, entrenched system becomes an all-consuming task on the journalists. When Marty Barron has his mandatory meeting with Cardinal Law, Len Cariou, he learns a few things about what is expected of him and is given a package, gift wrapped in gold paper with a wine red ribbon, containing the Catechism, paperback, 4th edition. Robbie and Sasha calmly team up to take on prominent lawyer Eric McLeish, Billy Crudup, an immaculately dressed Mephistopheles, all pride and carefully hidden despair. The sparkle in his eye holds the gaze with a shiny hook. He has been known to represent the victims of child abuse. Crudup brilliantly gives us a cipher of a man whose motivations we are dying to read. Mike, a man in constant motion, grapples with Mitchell Garabedian, Stanley Tucci, a lawyer who is not well connected, but committed to seeing his clients get justice through the court system. Sasha and Matt go door to door searching for victims who will come forward, while Mike literally runs and runs in order to keep up with the rapidly changing findings he uncovers. If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one, says Robbie, as his team's progress grows, garnering cooperation from the victims that include members of SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, led by activist Phil Saviano, Neil Huff. Spotlight does not fall into the trap of explanatory flashbacks. We do not need to see the protagonists' past because we can tell so much from what they are wearing. Costume designer Wendy Chuck, unrivaled master of khaki pants nuance, shows everything we need to know. From George Clooney in The Descendants to all her other fantastic collaborations with Alexander Payne, Election, About Schmidt, Sideways and Nebraska, Chuck dresses people in a way that explains something to us about the fleeting nature of clothes as well as the stamp they put on us. Her choices transcend the movies while being an integral part, something only the best achieve. Keaton's khakis, more golden in hue than those of an old-school alum, influential lawyer Jim Sullivan, Jamie Sheridan, and his watch just a little bigger and shinier, go with the rubber solace on his shoes and mark him as comparatively nouveau riche. Rachel McAdams gets to wear the clothes of a woman deeply uncomfortable with her body. The black tops Sasha prefers, are there for her to hide in and blend in. She is on a mission and McAdams portrays her fearlessly and without a false note. The question, "What took you so long?" is at the core of Spotlight. The time of looking away from something that needs to be addressed adds up. Every non-action towards a crime comes with a price and the truth will be dragged into the open eventually. In 2003, the Boston Globe won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service for their investigation, and this film is based on those who uncovered the hidden story. The Independent Spirit Awards has announced that Spotlight is the winner of the Robert Altman Award. Spotlight is a crackerjack procedural, as assured a piece of filmmaking as I've seen all year, and one of the finest movies in recent years about the pitfalls of investigative journalism. Writer/director Tom McCarthy constructs scenes of breathtaking elegance and trusts that you, the intelligent viewer, will be able to follow. What a radical thing. Take that, Sorkin. Every scene is gorgeously underacted, cut at just the perfect time, and the result ends up feeling as bruising and immediate as life itself. McCarthy's fifth film as director has the grace and polish of a brilliant stage play, along with some dazzling verbal fireworks and a healthy dose of moral outrage to go down with all the requisite prestige trappings. In a year that's shaping up to be one of the best in recent memory, this one's already shot to the top, or at least within spitting distance of the top. To think that this is McCarthy's follow-up to the toxic, egregious The Cobbler is sort of mind-boggling when you think about it. That film was the director's one outright dud. Self-pity and casual racism have never been appealing bedfellows. That awful movie that seemed more in line with the juvenile aggression and solipsism of star Adam Sandler's Happy Madison brand than anything McCarthy has since brought to the table. He makes mawkish, well-acted dramedies about life's ups and downs, about life's good-hearted and sometimes tortured outsiders. That being said, the guy's not exactly consistent up until now, I thought. He's a fine filmmaker, but still learning. His charming breakout The Station Agent elicits the same sensation as a warm, familiar hug. It's both completely alien and yet totally familiar. And yet his two subsequent movies The Visitor and his overrated Win-Win were uneven affairs, marred by awkward attempts at human comedy, Alexander Payne, but with a lighter, less savage touch, and a general tonal wonkiness. After whatever the hell The Cobbler was, I was ready to write McCarthy off completely. Good thing I didn't. Spotlight is scarily assured, and yet never ostentatious. It's a low, slow, delicious burn of a film, as frighteningly confident in its breathless intelligence as vintage Sidney Lumet. That's not a comparison I make lightly. The film's title alludes to the Boston Herald's Spotlight crew, a gang of all too dedicated reporters who have essentially shelved their lives, loves, jobs and families to get to the bottom of whatever that week's story is. They slug down back coffee in their white paper cups, they're on and off the phones, they're chasing down leads in this world. Even casual sit-downs could end in a potential source transaction. The cast here, evoking the tireless efforts of a news media that may perhaps no longer exist, is pretty much perfect across the board. Michael Keaton dials back the ferocious theatrics of his turn in Birdman to give a layered study in moral anguish and compromise. Mark Ruffalo dials up the tics and the sleepy-eyed, low-voiced charm as the team's most persistent dirt digger. Rachel McAdams once again lets us know she can walk away with the movie whenever she wants, and Brian Darcy James is so good as the team's moralistic family man that I found myself wondering why I hadn't seen more of him. A Google search revealed that his first official film credit was the original Blues Brothers film, But I digress. The story? A veritable cesspool of corruption and cover ups within the Catholic Church, specifically in regards to priests and clergymen accused of sexually assaulting choir boys. In a town full of devoted Catholic families, this is a bitter pill to swallow, a fact made more so by the efforts of the Herald's new head honcho, a world-weary Jew, Liev Schreiber, who is exempt from Boston's sometimes suffocating tribalism. At first, it's a few victims here and there. Some have turned to the needle, others may have felt homosexual urges at an early age but been hesitant to act on them without consent of a guardian figure. Once the story goes public, more start to come forward. The numbers skyrocket. And what starts as a meticulously crafted grown-up horror story adopts a tone of genuine hurt and anger. How could so many of these monsters have gotten away with this for so long, the film asks. Who was protecting them? The closing credits end with a list of American cities where priests have allegedly raped or molested young children. It spans 3 title cards, lists pretty much every American city and even a few European ones too. Let that sink in for a second. There's putting your faith in a higher power, and then there's this. I'm a sucker for these kinds of movies. I loved David Fincher's gloomy, engrossing Zodiac, in which Ruffalo played a similarly obsessive justice seeker, and I love the cinema of Alan J. Pakula, particularly Clute and All the President's Men, the granddaddy of procedurals and the ultimate movie about mucking around in the foul gardens of the rich and powerful. Spotlight is a rich and engaging entry in this respected genre, and although it evokes a time when social media didn't have a strong hold on the news outlet and, in many ways, feels as old-fashioned as a film by Frank Capra, it's also the perfect film for right now. Granted, 2015 has been a year of appalling and often unprovoked racial hate crimes, Catholic sex scandals, that's so mid-2000s, but when the cases begin to stack up so quickly, you start to wonder, who is letting this happen? Can a group of dogged, earnest professionals with an interest in meting out justice stand up against a behemoth that is more or less founded on a singular corrupt notion? Spotlight did the film is charmingly enamored with the relentless researching, fact-checking, interviewing and general hard work that its team members consider in between breathing and brushing their teeth. Whether that's possible today is another story, and one that Spotlight grimly hints at. Everyone is so plugged in and yet simultaneously distanced from the world that surrounds them that the kind of on-the-ground work that the Spotlight team engages in is a more or less old-fashioned habit. But evil still beckons from within the crevices of powerful institutions. The only difference is whether or not they say their rosaries. There is a shot towards the end of the movie that absolutely broke my heart, and speaks to Spotlight's stirring humanist ethos. McAdams Sasha is a lapsed Catholic who nevertheless attends Mass with his committed Catholic granny, in spite of her own obvious reservations. After the story has landed, McCarthy plants the camera squarely on the kind-eyed older actress playing McAdams' grandmother, Eileen Padua, sitting in her quaint breakfast nook as she reads the news in the paper. She is devastated, her wrinkled face crumbling like paper mache. Then, she simply asks her granddaughter, with her lip quivering, to fetch her a glass of water. The opportunity for a big, shameless moment is there, but shockingly, McCarthy never goes for it. It's a tender, immaculately observed flash of humanity that sneaks up on you and absolutely destroys you. Much of Spotlight follows suit. This is unquestionably one of the year's best films. On January 6, 2002, Boston Globe subscribers picked up their local paper and saw the front page headline, "Church Allowed Abuse by Priest for Years." The story, written by Michael Resendez, a reporter on the investigative Spotlight team, was massive, in word count and impact, but it was just the beginning. 2 more Spotlight stories on the same topic ran that day, with more to follow. The uproar from the Spotlight stories, the Boston Phoenix, an alternative weekly, had covered church sexual abuse, but it didn't have the circulation of the Globe, was so sustained that by December 2002, Cardinal Bernard Law, the Archbishop of Boston, stepped down in disgrace, saying in a statement, To all those who have suffered from my shortcomings and mistakes, I both apologize and from them beg forgiveness. Pope John Paul II gave him a position in Rome, where law remains to this day. The Spotlight team won a Pulitzer Prize in 2003 for their reporting. These events are familiar to everyone by now, but those first Spotlight stories are painfully familiar to Boston Catholics. My family is Boston Irish Catholic, and it was the first news story to dominate everyone's conversations since September 11, only a few months prior. Tom McCarthy's superb Spotlight, co-written by McCarthy and Josh Singer, is the story of that investigation. Spotlight is a great newspaper movie of the old-school model, calling up not only obvious comparisons with All the President's Men and Zodiac, two movies with similar devotion to the sometimes crushingly boring gumshoe part of reportage, but also Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell shouting into adjacent phones in His Girl Friday. At a late moment in Spotlight, there's an image of the presses printing off the edition that carries the church abuse story. Such a scene is so de rigueur in newspaper movies that it borders on cliché, but in Spotlight it is a moment of intense emotion. The truth in that edition, the evil it describes, will be a wound in the psyche of millions, but it must come out. The Spotlight team is editor Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton, and 3 reporters, Michael Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, and Maddie Carroll, Brian Darcy James. John Slattery plays Globe Managing Deputy Editor Ben Bradley Jr. All of the reporters are locals, and everyone has some connection to the Catholic Church, referred to as only the Church. When a new editor, Marty Barron, Liev Schreiber, comes on board, he is perceived as an outsider because he's not from Boston at all. He is first seen boning up on the city by devouring The Curse of the Bambino. In an initial meeting with Robbie, Barron brings up a recent piece by a Globe columnist about the Boston Archdiocese's potentially shady handling of various abuse cases. Barron suggests the story could be perfect for the Spotlight team. Robbie hesitates, but Barron gently pushes, "This strikes me as an essential story for a local paper." It's a great line, and it's so underplayed by Schreiber that you might miss its effectiveness. This goes for his entire performance. Right before the church abuse edition goes to print, they all meet in Marty's office, and he looks through a hard copy of the story, crossing out words, murmuring to himself, "Adjectives? That is a newspaper man." Holed up in a cluttered basement office, the Spotlight team exhibit the behavior of people who spend more time with one another than they do with their own families. Personal details about their lives are at a minimum. Sasha goes to church every Sunday with her grandmother, a ritual she finds increasingly painful. Resendez's marriage is on the rocks. Maddie has a couple of kids, and a big magnet on his refrigerator emblazoned with an American flag and Remember 9/11 on it. We know who these people are. At first the team focuses on one former priest, John J. Geoghegan, alleged to have molested many children years ago. But Barron urges them to remember that the story is bigger than just one bad apple priest. He wants to go after the whole system. The corruption is obviously systemic, but the key issue becomes, did Cardinal Law know? That's the big game Spotlight is after. The Curse of the Bambino may have taught Barron about Red Sox Nation, but a meet and greet with Cardinal Law, a creepily sincere Lencariu, during Barron's first week on the job is even more illuminating. Barron is stunned at Law's assumption that the Boston Globe would work with the Catholic Church. Sasha and Michael question the adult victims willing to come forward, who are so traumatized they can't find the words to describe what was taken from them. A couple of lawyers, played by Billy Crudup and Stanley Tucci, sit on opposite ends of the spectrum of dealing with the Catholic Church from a legal standpoint. McCarthy and his entire team, from production designers to location scouts to extras casting directors, get Boston right. Different neighborhoods, Back Bay, Southie, are used as shorthand for entire worlds. There are clear class divides. Predator priests often worked in low-income neighborhoods, targeting boys who needed father figures. The atmosphere is very Boston, having a beer on the back porch in the dead of winter, or arguing about work over hot dogs at Fenway. Boston, with its confusing colonial-era streets and church spires jutting into the sky on practically every corner, is the soul of the movie. Spotlight feels local. Spotlight also shows a deeper truth, the level of psychological trauma brought on by abuse, not just to the victims, but to horrified Catholics everywhere. Spotlight takes faith seriously. An ex-priest turned psychiatrist is an important source, and when he's asked how Catholics reconcile the abuse scandal with their faith, he replies, "My faith is in the eternal. I try to separate the two." Mark Ruffalo modulates his performance over the course of the film at a world-class level, moving from a patient-dogged investigator to a rumpled maniac racing through courthouses, chasing down cabs and screaming at his boss. In a raw moment, he confesses to Sasha that even though he stopped going to church years ago, he always assumed that one day he would go back. "I had that in my back pocket," he says, glancing at her with a flash of anguish. Spotlight makes the issue of lost faith visceral by taking the time to let it breathe, letting it play its part in the story. The newspaper world has changed a lot since 2002. Things look pretty grim. But good long-form journalism still exists. The recent New York Times series about the conditions for nail salon workers is a good example. Such work is as important now as it has ever been. Spotlight is the kind of movie where a scene showing a group of reporters huddled over church directories, taking notes in silence, becomes a gripping sequence. It's reminiscent of the row of mission control guys in Apollo 13, whipping out their slide rules as one, thereby almost single-handedly expanding the concept of heroism. Spotlight, with all its pain and urgency, is a pure celebration of journalists doing what they do best. I was so in the mood to watch this at one point, and it paid off. Spotlight deserved its nomination and victory in the Best Picture category at the Oscars. It is combined as a solid film with packed performances and a thrilling plot. Liev Schreiber was particularly good. I've always considered him an accomplished actor, but this is some of his finest work. I was initially convinced that this man had to have had a motive. He was so clear on where he was heading to reveal how underhanded and terrible the Catholic Church was with dealing with the rampant child molestation in the church. He also immediately requested that the project be started as soon as he walked in. However, truth was his only motive. He wanted the story out there. No secret vendettas or dramas, just the truth. It is quite amusing how desperate they were to have Rachel McAdams appear ordinary. You can't hide that level of beauty. She is an actress that can convey so much with her eyes. Her sympathy and anger and compassion towards the victims came through without her touching the people she was interviewing at the most once. I loved her role. She was equal to her male colleagues and treated as such. Mark Ruffalo gives another outstanding performance, but I've come to accept and expect that from him. He's quite the celebrated actor, but I feel he deserves more accolades. I can't really name one movie where I thought he did a bad job. Michael Keaton delivers another important and noteworthy performance. He's in a class of his own, and I must say, even though he's quite old now, there is a virility and energy to him that remains appealing after all this time. I can actually list the entire cast here. It is outstanding work and I cannot praise that enough. It made the movie so much better. As for the storyline, it is harrowing and even more disturbing when you acknowledge that this is the truth. I was raised Catholic as a child, and although we left when the clergy couldn't answer religious questions from my father properly, it is still upsetting to think that at least a percentage of these priests are child molesters. Spotlight isn't even the brainchild of some gifted writer, it is based on true events. The Catholic Church is one of the most controversial bodies that have ever existed. I loved that line from Sasf that the Catholic Church thinks in centuries. I see that the Catholic Church had some issues with the depiction, but it is obvious that they would have done so however the movie turned out. I personally thought it was a clear-minded approach to the horrors that these children had suffered under the hands of those who were meant to protect them. The movie could have gone on a witch hunt against the Catholics, and it didn't. A great achievement by the script writers and directors. I liked the anger these journalists developed. Professionalism only goes that far, and if they continued through without getting angry or upset, it would have been too cold. Mark Ruffalo's outburst was raw and powerful and completely justified. I wanted to open this review with some sort of flashy pun about how good journalism shines a light on the underserved or poorly treated in our society, and because this film is called Spotlight, it does a particularly good job at that. I couldn't find the right quote, and I see quite a few other reviews used the shines a light verbiage in describing the story of the Boston Globe investigative reporters who uncovered widespread sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, as well as a massive cover-up operation. I also think the journalists who inspired the story would be unimpressed by the obvious nature of the pun. After all, one of the few edits Marty Baron, the editor of the Globe at the time, had for his Spotlight reporters was an adjective in their copy: a general no-no for news writers. A no-frills editor and a no-frills guy, Marty was, if I ever saw one, and he's played to perfection by Liev Schreiber in one of the film's standout roles. But like the Spotlight team itself, there's no weak link in the Spotlight cast or the film as a whole. It's a sensational piece of straightforward, dramatic filmmaking that uses matter-of-factness as a weapon against its audience. You don't expect the film to pack as much of a punch as it does because the outcome is never in doubt, and director Thomas McCarthy's approach is decidedly unfussy from the start. But Spotlight shook me up and left an indelible mark. It's incredible. The film takes place mostly in 2001, immediately after Baron assumed the top editor role at the Globe. The Spotlight team consists of 4 journalists: Mike Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James, and their leader, Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton. As Robinson explains to Baron, the Spotlight team investigates a specific subject for as much as a year before putting pen to paper on a story. He thinks they should focus on the Catholic Church, specifically a priest who was accused of sexually assaulting minors at as many as 6 different Boston parishes over 30 years. They take the assignment with varying degrees of enthusiasm. And just like All the President's Men, which is such an obvious point of comparison for Spotlight, but a fitting one for its subject matter and quality, one piece of information proves to be the tip of the iceberg for something much greater and more horrible than anyone involved could imagine. The facts and figures are out there, but I'll leave them out of this critique of the film and let you decide how much you want to know going in. If you don't know much about the crimes, or your memory of the early aughts is fuzzy, the staggering number of victims will broadside you. As far as the filmmaking goes, Spotlight is perhaps the ultimate case, at least in 2015, of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Everything in McCarthy's movie works, from the ensemble and the writing to the editing and the cinematography, but as good as individual performances and craft achievements are, it's still hard to account for how or why this movie is so damn good. Let's start with the cast, and if there's any 2015 movie that screams out SAG Ensemble Award, please, more loudly than this movie, I've yet to see it. Mark Ruffalo is best in show for my money. He burrows into the character of Resendez with a ferocity and precision that you don't see in movies like this. His physical and verbal tics are so strange, and yet, by the end of the film, they say so much about the character. He's arguably the most hard-nosed of the team, and he's definitely the least connected to Boston's deep Catholic roots, outside of the Jewish outsider Baron. When his superiors tell him it's not yet time to run the story, he personalizes it. Journalism is defeating him slowly, but it is, and he's not ready to let these crooks of the hook. He explodes in the film's standout dramatic scene and reminds everyone why their city needs them. Then, there's Keaton, so good in Birdman last year that he'll almost certainly take home a makeup trophy this year, even though I think he's better here. He's not in your face the way Regan Thompson was, or the way Mike Resendez is, but his Robbie is the film's soul. He describes himself as Spotlight's player coach, though I'd argue he's more a player coach GM. He's created a team that's effective at every position. His journalism gets done with a personal touch. Resendez is the bulldog. and Sasha Pfeiffer and Matt Carroll knock on doors knowing they'll get turned away 99 times out of 100. He's a father figure for all of them, but also a beacon of friendship within the community, and his ability to balance friendship with his professional responsibilities is one of Spotlight's primary sources of conflict. The character manages both excellently, and both Keaton and the film's screenwriters McCarthy and Josh Singer deserve credit for conveying that to the audience without shoving his moral dilemmas down our throats mawkishly. The film never goes down that road. McCarthy has more faith in his audience than that. During a scene of heightened drama, the only flourish might be a slow pan out by the camera or some jump cuts between his characters conducting interviews in different places. What Spotlight proves, though, is that flashing editing doesn't create suspense, nor does yelling and shouting necessarily create drama. Great writing and acting and a director who's confident in those two things can combine to make a perfect or nearly perfect film. I'm not ready to call Spotlight perfect yet. Nor will I give it that Scarlet M4 masterpiece that just asks for people to tear it down, especially during the nasty Oscar season we're entering. No, all I'll say now is that it's among my favorite films of 2015. It's virtually assured a top 5 spot on my best of list this year, and it's a film I'll get so much enjoyment out of watching again and sharing with others. It grips you and moves you. It's about why I love journalism, and it is why I love movies. The Catholic Church has always been an influential institution in Boston, the only metropolitan area in the U.S. where Catholics make up more than half the population. Although cases of sexual abuse of children perpetrated by Catholic priests had become public in the early 1990s, many prosecutors, judges, and politicians remained loyal to the faith of their ancestors and turned their eyes away from the growing body of evidence. By doing so, the system made it possible for priests to continue their sexual assaults with the knowledge that they were outside of the law. After all, who would dare sue the Church? The Catholic Church was also complicit in keeping the abuse under wraps. The Archdiocese either ignored or paid off victims, settling cases through private mediations to avoid the court system. Instead of dismissing predator priests, they reassigned them to other parishes or gave them sick leave and a stay at a treatment center. Spotlight is a chilling and ethically cogent film about the Boston Globe's Pulitzer Prize-winning expose of sexual abuse by Catholic clergy that revealed the breadth and depth of these horrific crimes against society's most vulnerable members' children. One of the many reasons why this sobering film is so emotionally riveting is that its director, Tom McCarthy, has the special gift for creating memorable character-driven films such as The Station Agent and The Visitor. He and co-writer Josh Singer introduce us to a stirring circle of colorful journalists who are animated by a zealous pursuit of justice and truth. They also manage in a crosscut of scenes to reveal the pain and the suffering of abuse victims. Among the journalists who stretch themselves to reveal the complicated ethical dimensions of this story are the 4-person investigative Spotlight team: Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton, Mike Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, and Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James. They are asked to pursue the story vigorously by Marty Baron, Liev Schreiber, the new editor of the paper who wants to make an impact upon the Boston community, even though their immediate superior, Bed Bradley Jr. John Slattery, is not so sure they can successfully challenge the church. These intrepid reporters track down witnesses, interview a diverse group of victims, and discover a way to identify priests who may be abusers, thus breaking through the walls of secrecy that have been erected to protect the Catholic Church from culpability. Even when they have proof that they can accuse as many as 70 priests, Barron urges them to go further and show that the Church itself has engaged in a massive cover-up. Other top-notch performances include Stanley Tucci as Mitchell Garabedian, an attorney representing 86 victims in the case against Father John Geoghegan, Jamie Sheridan as a church-connected friend of Robinson's, and Billy Crudup as a slick lawyer defending Catholic institutional power. After hearing their explanations of how confidentiality rules and other pressures make it nearly impossible for outsiders to get to the truth, we understand Garabedian's comment that if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one. Spotlight hits the mark with its searing depiction of the Catholic Church's efforts to shield priests and do whatever necessary to maintain its power and wealth. The film also shows the shocking lack of human feeling for the victims. As Phil Slaviano, Neil Huff, the leader of a victim support group, explains, rape is not just physical abuse, it is also spiritual abuse, taking away a child's trust and faith. At the end of the film, we learn that eventually 249 Boston area priests were identified as sexual predators, with over 1,000 victims. And that is only a small piece of the overall picture. A long scroll of city names identifies other places around the globe where child abuse by priests has been documented. Leaving the theater, we found our hearts heavy with sadness for the Catholic Church and compassion for its victims. In late 2015, I made the decision to publish my top 10 films of the year on New Year's Eve. Sadly, that meant a number of films, which hadn't been released in Denmark yet, were deemed ineligible for my top 10 films of 2015 list. One of those films were Spotlight. By now, I've seen Spotlight 3 times, and it has made me reconsider its status as ineligible. Spotlight is an exceptional film, and one of the best of the year. Tom McCarthy's Spotlight follows a team of journalists with the Boston Globe. In the early 2000s, after having hired a new editor, played by Liev Schreiber, the Globe's Spotlight team, led by Walter Robinson, played by Michael Keaton, and Michael Resendez, played by Mark Ruffalo, starts to investigate the Catholic Church and a series of sexual abuse cases. One of the greatest things about this film is the ensemble cast. All of the performances are solid. Rachel McAdams and John Slattery are really good. Stanley Tucci and Liev Schreiber are absolutely great. But Mark Ruffalo and, especially, Michael Keaton were exceptional. Birdman was a great film, but I didn't love it as much as most reviewers did. Michael Keaton is great in Birdman, but I thought he was better in Spotlight. Spotlight is, obviously, based on a true story, but not all true story films work. Spotlight, though, is phenomenal. The story is enthralling and spine-tingling, and is just as good, if not better, than classics in the biographical/historical drama genre, like Alan J. Pakula's All the President's Men and Robert Redford's Quiz Show. Spotlight is a must-watch film that highlights a huge problem. It is incredibly well shot. The dialogue is excellent. It is detailed, without being boring. It respects its audience, and handles a tough topic with a lot of respect. Spotlight is a near masterpiece. It is a very real, and very scary. I strongly urge you to see it. Lots of people will tell you they watch movies to shut their brain off for a couple hours. Not me. It's why I have a well-documented soft spot for mysteries. They keep me thinking and address me like a goddamn grown-up. I had journalistic investigation drama Spotlight in my crosshair way before it was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Movie, but I have curiously watched it the morning of the ceremony. It's crazy how such an accolade can change your perception of something you just watched and appreciated to some degree. Spotlight is a decent movie. It's smart and it delivers an important message, but it will always suffer the burden of expectations because it was so not the best movie Hollywood offered us in 2015. Spotlight tells the true story of the Boston Globe's investigative journalism team, tasked with digging into an old story about lawyer Mitchell Garabedian, Stanley Tucci, accusing the local cardinal of letting one of his priests molest little boys. The team gets to work and quickly uncovers a pattern in the ranks of the Catholic Church. The story is much bigger than they would have thought. The clergy is well aware of it and has its claws set so deep into the city of Boston that getting to the truth is difficult, next to impossible really. Not for a gang of overzealous and dedicated investigative journalists it ain't. The case earned the Spotlight team the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2003. So, Spotlight has two major things going for itself, a riveting, and true, story and a cast of beloved actors. Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, Michael Keaton, and Liev Schreiber are the best known commodities, but it also featured underrated actors such as Stanley Tucci and Paul Guilfoyle, and last but not least John Slattery, better known to television audiences as that magnificent bastard Roger Sterling. As it often is the case with superstar cast in low-key movies, they tend to step on each other's toes a little. Parts like McAdams and Schreiber were a bit marginal and maybe didn't deserve such headliner talent. Mark Ruffalo and Stanley Tucci delivered the best performances of the movie as they often do. Acting is a major reason why Spotlight is successful, but I have to say God, it looks like shit. I'm talking straight to television afternoon Hallmark Channel biopic ugly here. Spotlight is so deliberately stern it's annoying. The lighting is super tame, replicating a soulless corporate office. The actors are underdressed. They look like penguins in their everyday people attire. I understand that the story and the message are what's important here, but would it have been possible to have a little fun here? Competitor for Best Movie Oscar The Big Short had a similar office dynamic and a much better sense of style. If you're going to strip your movie of everything that makes a movie fun to watch, why not make it a television series? So, pardon me if I couldn't completely get behind Spotlight. I do not doubt its sense of purpose for 1 second, but it is a stern and humorless film that reminded me of my old man giving me shit in front of my friends when I was a teenager. It's really tough to judge it for what it is because it's not trying to be anything a moviegoing audience should pay for. It is a television show masquerading as a film. I'm not saying it should have been all neon and glitter, but Spotlight is a one-trick pony that borrows credibility from its subject in order to bolster its meaningfulness in the Hollywoodian landscape, and films that do that are a major pet peeve of mine. See it for the acting, I guess. Mark Ruffalo was once again incredible and of course didn't win the Academy Award he deserved. Rent it or see it on Netflix. Either way, it doesn't require a big screen to appreciate. I thought it drew a scary portrait of how still relevant and powerful the clergy still was in the American political landscape, and I believe it will be this movie's legacy. Wasn't crazy about the way it portrayed Boston as complicit to the horrors of the Catholic Church. I think most people who live there are fundamentally good working class people, but the world we're living in is prey to influences we don't notice or understand, and thanks to the journalists of Spotlight, we have a better grip on our future. They deserve the Hollywood treatment. I just think they deserved a better Hollywood treatment than that. They were the reason why the movie won the Oscar, and it should have been the opposite. It's a no-brainer to review these two films together. Each in its own way is a variation on the classic Hans Christian Andersen tale The Emperor's New Clothes. Both waltz around an elephant in the room, something rotten is taking place and decisions have to be made. Both films expose those who pretend it is business as usual, revealing the horror of the sound of silence. Both reveal what happens when moral codes are abandoned to the detriment of millions directly and indirectly. Disillusionment wreaks havoc with the heartland. In the case of Spotlight, Boston Globe reporters, uniformly portrayed with excellence by a fine roster of actors, especially Mark Ruffalo and Rachel McAdams, play the child crying out, "The Emperor is wearing no clothes?" Here, we see the drama of investigative reporting as it prepares to expose the horrendous deceit of the Catholic Church hierarchy protecting pedophile/ephibophile priests. They do so with a strong moral righteousness on behalf of the children and teenagers who were abused and those who could or would be. The irony in a very brief scene as Mark Ruffalo's reporter sees children singing Silent Night in a church's Christmas pageant is heartbreaking. Moreover, Spotlight reflects the important role journalists play in free societies exposing abuses of power in institutions from church to state. In that, I think it is superior to the other fine journalist-centered film All the President's Men, the 1976 film directed by Alan J. Pakula. Director Tom McCarthy keeps the pacing at an exciting pulse, and he and his co-screenwriter Josh Singer keep the dialogue clear and illuminating. Furthermore, the tone and style of the movie is not one of grandstanding but of insight, sobriety, and even humility as it exposes the failures of people in power. Not only is the church guilty, beyond the hierarchy so were so many parents and clueless parishioners, but Boston's civic leaders, lawyers, and even the reporter's own paper, the Boston Globe. There are many meanings to Jesus' statement, "The truth will set you free," John 8:32, and here is an excellent example of the power of truth when it is, at last, set free, however horribly delayed. I suggest bishops involved in the cover-up see this movie annually as part of their Lenten penance. But not only are bishops, but all clergy and leaders in every field of church, state, education, medicine, wherever fears of liabilities and the temptation to protect reputations could prevail at the expense of victims and the public good. Admitting wrongs may be considered shame in social circles, but in truth, and in true religion, it is deliverance toward the greater good, ensuring the cessation of evil and preventing future harm. Spotlight makes it very clear how admitting one or two scandals early on, and implementing clear preventative guidelines now in place but only after the Boston Globe's expose, would have spared hundreds of victims and put the bishops on the humble path all people of faith should walk. The Big Short takes a different point of view, exposing, and explaining, the debacle of Wall Street and U.S. banks. The protagonists here also see the truth of what is going on, but unlike the whistleblowers of Spotlight, they prefer to keep the story to themselves in order to benefit by it. What seems like a gamble to most is a matter of certainty to them. The financial real estate bubble is ready to pop. Our heroes, irony intended, position themselves to become millionaires/billionaires by investing in what is a kind of insurance policy. When the mortgages and real estate investments fail, they'll collect big time. And there isn't one character concerned for the greater good. Should anyone expose the oncoming avalanche, none of our brilliant geek insiders would benefit. A shred of moral thinking enters into the investor's mindset. Some believe they are teaching Wall Street a lesson by using its greed against them, but this amounts to nothing more than a self-serving rationalization. Many will suffer, a few will strike it rich. The Big Short makes for good drama, revealing subterfuge at its most manic, but because it explores the complexities of the financial world, it also is a contemplative film. Director Adam McKay and his co-screenwriter Charles Randolph inspired fine-tuned performances from another great ensemble cast. Steve Carell and Ryan Gosling were standouts for me, and offer seasoned insights into human nature, particularly the fallibilities of materialism and greed. Ironies abound in this film, too. For one thing, all the focus and concentration required to attend to the script only makes it clear how so much of Wall Street's shenanigans went undisclosed. With sadness and cynicism, the film conveys how industry insiders bypassed moral deliverance and opted for greed. The rest of us were unaware and/or didn't care. And how was it that the government and the media turned a blind eye? Answers to that question may inspire some scrutiny regarding presidential and congressional candidates this November. Spotlight ranks among the very best of newspaper cinema because, just like effective journalism, it remains impartial. Alan J. Pakula's All the President's Men and David Fincher's Zodiac, both of which share a lot in common with Spotlight, stand out in this busy corner of cinema for the same reason. Truth is stranger than fiction, and there's no room in this variety of film for the sort of sensationalism that cinema can often err towards. It's that sort of sensationalism that might have imbued or amplified character traits in the name of entertainment, or fabricated impassioned monologues in the name of drama. Tom McCarthy's Spotlight may not be entirely innocent of filmic flourishes, but it never becomes suffocated by them. The film is the true story of a team of investigative journalists, from the Boston Globe newspaper, who uncover and probe corruption in the Catholic Church regarding the molestation of children by priests. McCarthy engages first and foremost in that corruption and in the investigation of the Boston Globe team, which calls itself, it operates still, Spotlight. Characters inhabit Spotlight but never dominate it. One of the crucial elements of McCarthy's direction is his wonderful casting. There's little room for character development. That's a good thing, but the cast, including Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, and Liev Schreiber, inject enough life in their characters that the film never smacks of mundane fact reiteration. It's also a movie without ego. McCarthy's stylistic flourishes are measured, welcome, and by and large serve the purpose of conveying significant information. It's not a flashy film but rather an expertly handled one. Spotlight is steered appropriately and effectively for almost the entirety of it. There's an extravagant number of films in the vein of Spotlight, but few that succeed so compellingly and with such understatement. The danger of engaging an audience intellectually is that any emotional prodding will shatter that sense of scholarly authority. People don't like their sentiment hurted, which is the pitfall of a lot of films that consider sensitive issues. It isn't a problem in Spotlight. Great newspaper films offer a comprehension and appreciation of the topic under investigation. Condensing that information so that it remains intellectually satisfying for an audience while fending off confusion is something that even some of the best of these films struggle with. There are names and dates that will go over your head in Spotlight. Such is the nature of the beast. It's how McCarthy and his team of filmmakers and actors convey the rest of it that's impressive. There's a real sense of progression to the investigation and how the film feeds the audience the crucial material. The film also promotes an awareness of the scandal that the relatively uninitiated otherwise might not have had. Did you ever tell anyone? Rachel McAdams' character Sasha Pfeiffer asks one of the molestation victims. Like who, is the answer. A priest. It's not an easy topic under scrutiny, and it wouldn't have been back in 2001, when the Spotlight team were in full swing with their investigation. How do you say no to God? Right, one character muses. That Catholicism shares a deep association with the city Boston is something that a lot of non-Catholics who've never been to Boston know. Another character suggests that priest molestation of children within the church is so rampant that it's a recognizable psychiatric phenomenon. That religion is ingrained in their city does something to explain how the crimes were kept a secret. It also illustrates the magnitude of the Spotlight task. All four of the team members were raised Roman Catholics. Spotlight highlights just how difficult it can be to obtain something as fundamental as truth. It's also a welcome reminder of the efforts good journalists will undergo in order to provide that truth to the public. There are a lot of films like Spotlight, all with the best of intentions and varying degrees of success in realizing those intentions. Spotlight is one of the appreciated few that accomplishes a great deal and somehow gives off a deceptive sense of effortlessness. For many, Spotlight was the surprise winner at last year's Oscars. The true events the film is based on might be ripe for dramatic adaptation, but with its low-key performance and style, and actors that did not subject themselves to physical extremes, it was still a dark horse. And yet it was by quite a way the most deserving, the only, winner. In 2002, journalists from the Boston Globe's daring and prestigious Spotlight team broke one of the most earth-shattering and shocking stories to ever be printed. This is the story of a decades-old cover-up and the efforts by a group of brave and unrelenting reporters to expose the truth of just how much the Catholic Church and their army of lawyers were hiding. The screenplay of Spotlight, by director Tom McCarthy and Josh Singer, isn't showy, with people talking how real people talk aside from byline-worthy proclamations such as warning that the church thinks in terms of centuries, a story about a bunch of lawyers turning child abuse into a cottage industry. Most people, even those who write for a living, aren't eloquent and reversed in their day-to-day. They make mistakes, act overly on emotion, and even journalists, I'll wager, struggle to remain impartial. How do you say no to God? What a question. It makes the atrocities committed by the modern Catholic Church all the more inexcusable when you realize that those whose faith is an integral part of who they are had very little power to fight back against abuses of power. Sometimes all you really need is a good story. The best journalists know this well. With the story that Spotlight uncovered, you have scandal, you have human interest, horror, and a race against time. The victim's grief and state of being isn't in the least sensationalist, but dealt with sensitively and as a fact of life. The film doesn't glamorize or exaggerate the profession of journalism. Tempting as it might be to turn this into a thriller, it remains a slow exposé. It's 2 hours of watching people gathering research, doing shorthand, and resisting the temptation to break a big story before they have all the facts. Arduous as this sounds, it's riveting stuff brought to life by a terrific cast, chiefly Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, and Brian Darcy James. I never thought trying to convince lawyers to release key sealed files in a time frame could be so tense. While I am completely against the publication of names of perpetrators until there is a reason to do so, the number of celebrities and normal people wrongly accused among those rightly convicted in the past few years is testament to this. The film does get across the need for stories to break in order to give more victims courage to come forward. The blame is clearly mostly at the Catholic Church's feet, but lawyers and journalists also come under fire, the former for serving evil when it suits them and the latter for not acting quickly enough. It's a low-key film throughout and there's no real late-game twists, but there is a revelation that certainly changes your perspective of the situation. Of the Best Picture nominees last year, none other than Spotlight should have won. The Revenant dazzled on a technical level, Room hit me right in the soul, and The Big Short was really smart and really knew it. I just realize now I never reviewed it. Short version, glossy, rapid fire, and with amusing cameo-led vignettes to explain financial complexities. I still don't understand financial complexities. Spotlight tells the story that needed to be told and does it with dignity. Spotlight's pervasive casual attitude and laid-back presentation as a film almost effectively undermine two things: how uniformly solid the acting is all around and how terrific of a film this really is. Reminiscent of Danny Boyle's Steve Jobs last month in that it's a film that focuses on a lot of decidedly smaller, human moments that make up the entirety of the project, Spotlight is a film that, unless you really look at it from various angles in its acting, storytelling, and pacing, you might mistake it for just another drama in a sea of adult entertainment this holiday season. The film revolves around the Boston Globe newsroom, specifically the Spotlight team, a division of about 4 field reporters who choose a topic apart from a great deal of media attention and devote months of investigation in order to give an elaborate, in-depth story on it in a future paper. The team is comprised of Walter Robbie Robinson, Michael Keaton, the veteran of the group who often acts as the leader, Michael Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, a young, persistent journalist, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, the woman responsible for undergoing difficult interviews that largely involve cold approaching people, and Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James, a family man who does a great deal of the team's research. It's 2001 and the dawn of the internet is finally showing an effect on newspaper readership. During this time, like now, many journalistic empires need to find a way to continue to boast that title whilst maintaining success. In response to the paper's slumping readership despite being acquired by the New York Times years earlier, Marty Baron, Liev Schreiber, is brought in to make adjustments where needed. Upon arrival, he more or less directs the Spotlight team to focus their attention on the Boston Archdiocese and the prevalent cases of molestation and sexual abuse involving priests and minors in the Catholic Church. Once the group begins to dive in and investigate, they realize the scope of the case is much greater and more impacting than any of them imagined, and also learn that the Globe had a great deal of this information at their disposal years ago but sat on their hands instead of covering it. Spotlight takes a fascinatingly relaxed approach to this story, focusing on the breezy conversations and etiquette in a newsroom. Everything from water cooler discussions about cases, blunt conversations with rolled-up dress shirt sleeves in front of computers, and tireless field reporting are shown in the film, detailing the sometimes thankless process of investigative journalism. Boston Globe's Spotlight team proves that, while investigative journalism has the ability to shake an entire nation, it's also criminally underfunded, much like watchdog journalism, which both find themselves largely segregated on the secondary sources of the internet in the present day. This sort of very nonchalant vibe does wonders when Spotlight inevitably turns emotional, specifically when Michael and Sasha find themselves interviewing former victims of priests who have lived with the hell and uncertainty of their troubled childhood experiences. Much like a well-written news article, Spotlight has the ability to infuriate in a manner that doesn't derail the project into manipulative territory. A large portion of the film is devoted to the meticulous practices of contemporary journalistic investigations in a way that really shows the talky, but elaborate process of interviewing. Americans, many of whom can't go a day without picking up a newspaper or reading a web page or an email telling them the day's events, often do not consider what goes into the stories we read and take for granted each day. Spotlight not only showcases the impact the stories can have, but also shows the most important parts of the news gathering process in a way that is gripping without being bombastic. The lax attitude and approach writers Thomas McCarthy, also director, and Josh Singer almost disguises the attention to acting and character development on display here. Michael Keaton hits another home run with his human portrayal of Walter Robinson, largely because his character, unlike Regan Thompson in Birdman last year, is never too dramatic or out of his own element. Meanwhile, Mark Ruffalo does a great job at being both a younger journalist and a likable one, not a smug nor self-serious jokester who ostensibly stumbled into the job as generic Hollywood roles would traditionally have it. Rachel McAdams delivers some of the strongest and most compelling work of her career thanks to her realistic portrayal of her character, and the same goes for Brian Darcy James. Out of all of them, however, perhaps Liev Schreiber gives one of the quirkiest performances, as his character is so stiff and intent on not being invasive that he, as an actor, still manages to be a strong presence on screen, as well. Spotlight doesn't look to shortchange any of these characters nor play them to predictable types. Walter isn't the kind of veteran journalist who screams and shouts whenever he doesn't get his way. Michael isn't the lackadaisical bloke who doesn't take his work seriously. Sasha isn't the ditzy journalist who needs to constantly be reminded her job comes with a big responsibility. Matt isn't as stiff as a bored moralist, and Marty isn't the evil corporate downsizer looking to corrupt the integrity of the globe, not openly, at least. None of these characters pander to conventional archetypes, and perhaps that, much like the strength of the film's approach, will be lost upon audiences who do not actively notice it at first. This is a film so elegantly directed, written, and layered that I've almost forgotten to really address the reason for the film, which are the horrifying cases of molestation in the church. McCarthy and Singer handle the more heart-wrenching scenes of the film with appropriate care and, most importantly, respect by not milking them for cheap sentimentality. Their efforts to quietly impose the significance of these scenes, germane with Howard Shore's very subtle and melodic score, work to make the film deliver a message that doesn't feel like it's ringing the bell of a boxing match in efforts to get us to pay attention. Once again, it's so low-key you'll almost miss it. Finally, McCarthy directs Spotlight with humble interjections of style. Consider a key telephone interview being the subject of a medium-length take that has all the members of the Spotlight team hovered around a phone. McCarthy's camera focuses on the telephone before slowly pulling back the camera to reveal the entire team, and then pulling even further back down a hallway to minimize the size of the team. This interview really establishes the scope of the Catholic Church's unforgivable crimes, and this effort to showcase how small this team is in the face of this huge issue is a nice way to capture the film with an unwritten thesis, and investigative journalism in a nutshell. Everything in Spotlight that's so brilliantly done is so quietly captured that it's almost as if it's designed for you to miss. With that, I'd advise you to watch it like you would read a gripping news article, with intent to focus and read between the lines, even the headlines. Spotlight is a prime example of what it most celebrates. It is a terrific and unfussy movie specifically about the unglamorous professionalism. It is the filmic telling of a handful of Boston Globe reporters who exposed a wide-reaching sex abuse and cover-up scandal in the Catholic Church. Yet despite the potentially sensational subject matter and potential for melodrama, it remains a nose-to-the-ground character drama that thrives on the nitty-gritty details and painstaking work that slowly but surely broke said major story. Spotlight is one of the better movies of the year, offering the kind of hard-nosed craftsmanship that we used to take for granted at a studio level. It is telling that this film shares token similarities with another Michael Keaton drama about investigative journalism, The Paper. 21 years ago that Keaton/Glenn Close drama was a random studio programmer from Universal, now owned by Comcast Corp. In 2015, Spotlight comes from Open Road Films, a smaller and emerging distribution house, and its entire box office fate rests upon whether or not it can maintain its status as an Oscar front-runner. The film, produced by Anonymous Content, First Look Media, Participant Media, and Rocklin/Faust, premiered at the Venice Film Festival in the first week of September. It is not a little ironic that I saw the film well over a month ago and kept putting off writing the review because I kept getting distracted by other more click-happy stories or reviews. Nor is it a little ironic that Mark Ruffalo spent much of the press tour tossing out clickbaity Hulk gossip in regards to future Marvel movies, which in turn kept the movie in the media cycle in the run-up to release. On the plus side, it opens today in 5 theaters, so if you happen to stumble upon this review and happen to live in New York and LA, you can run, rather than walk, to a nearby landmark or ArcLight and check it out this very evening. It will be expanding over the next month, where it will attempt to hold onto its preliminary position as the would-be Oscar frontrunner, even as The Martian seems to be picking up steam by virtue of its box office success and crowd-pleasing triumphs. The Martian is terrific too, and I'm necessarily picking favorites until I see a few more major titles over the next few weeks. But it still stands out that this picture, despite featuring hot-button subject matter, an all-star cast, and an absolutely mainstream sensibility, probably wouldn't have gotten made if not for its potential as an Oscar contender. Say what you will about the season and how it resembles a dog and pony political campaign, but it's one of the only reasons that movies like Spotlight or Room get made and or end up playing at a multiplex. Anyway, directed and co-written by Tom McCarthy, with the help of co-writer Josh Singer, Spotlight is a refreshingly thoughtful and openly literate bit of old-school entertainment. At a glance, the film is about how a crack team of Boston Globe reporters, Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, and Brian Darcy James, follow a story pitched by a new editor, a low-key and piercingly Schreiber, that eventually leads to the notion that various high-ranking Catholic bishops in Boston and elsewhere had covered up countless instances of sex abuse at the hand of priests by buying silence and shifting the offenders to different parishes. None of this is news to anyone who followed the story at the time or saw Amy Berg's definitive documentary Deliver Us from Evil, but this is a remarkably assured recreation of a major journalistic triumph. It's a straight procedural through and through, with no subplots, action beats, romantic interests, or other distractions from the matter at hand. That the film becomes something of an ode to print journalism and the importance of a vigorous local press should go without saying, but it bears worth saying anyway. Just think about how often a would-be national story emanates from something first reported in a local paper. But more than that, the film is a splendidly acted and carefully constructed with an emphasis on actual face-to-face and document-to-document investigation. It is a fascinating contrast with Sony Classics' Truth, which argued that the truth of the story being investigated was more important than the accuracy of the evidence used to prove it. Spotlight comparatively is all about the importance of getting it absolutely right, as the film's timeline drags on for months before the parties are satisfied with what they have. There is a palpable sense of frustration at having to stay silent and potentially let more victims suffer in the present tense so that the reporters can build a strong enough case to so shock the populace as to prevent more victimization in the future. That a cast featuring the likes of Keaton, Ruffalo, McAdams, Schreiber, and John Slattery qualifies as an acting treat, James is terrific too, is an exercise is stating the obvious as well. Stanley Tucci is superb as well as a weary and beaten down attorney for various sex abuse victims, and the film manages the tricky balance of being upfront about the crimes committed and the effect on the victims without wallowing in easy melodrama. Yes, the film touches on the powers that be that would prefer not to see the scandal uncovered, and yes, it focuses on how the church and the government intersects in Boston, but again, it is all the more searing for how offhandedly it's presented. This is an adult film with adult sensibilities, so it doesn't feel the need to hold our hands. And it's impossible to watch our dedicated journalists doing their thing with both impeccable professionalism and incredible patience and not be saddened at the notion that today's media would hardly justify such dedication. Not only is there more monetary value in the hot take, but in today's polarized political climate there is no reason to assume that a story like the one uncovered wouldn't be merely viewed under a "how does this affect the current political race of the moment" horse race mentality. Again, it is no small irony that this film opens alongside Truth, a film that documents what may have been the turning point in the eventual death of slow journalism in our infotainment age. Granted, I spend my day writing about movie trailers and penning speculative box office essays, so I am in no position to throw stones. Heck, considering how online traffic works, even taking the time to write reviews for movies like Spotlight and Room amounts to an act of charity. Having said that, I have long argued that the way for print media to remain relevant is to merely do their jobs better than we do and provide what an online blog post cannot, rather than trying to approximate the online experience. Obviously there is still plenty of that which goes on all around the country, but damned if it's not hard to justify it in a 24-hour news cycle mentality. What matters in Spotlight is not that the Spotlight team got the story first, but rather that they took the time to get the story right. And as surely as any Aaron Sorkin television, with half the soaring and self-congratulatory navel-gazing, Spotlight is a shining ode to the sheer glory of professionalism in a most important of occupations. And by being so darn good, it becomes a prime example of the very thing it celebrates. Except for unrelenting bulldogs like Seymour Hersh, who had to publish his latest article outside of the US, true investigative journalism seems to have become as obsolete as the 8-track tape. Tom McCarthy's The Cobbler, Spotlight, however, reminds us of what it was and what it still could be. Set in Boston, the film is named after the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative unit of the Boston Globe which, in the years following 9/11, investigated the abuse of children by parish priests and the link of silence that existed between the Catholic Church and the Boston political and business community. It was a silence that allowed offending priests off the hook for their crimes, being transferred from parish to parish where they often reoffended. Movie reference in the film which follows the journalistic procedural style of such classics as All the President's Men, Michael Keaton, Birdman, is Globe unit editor, Walter Robbie Robinson. When the story circulates about the church's kid gloves treatment of molester Father John Geoghegan, the paper's editor-in-chief Marty Barron, Liev Schreiber, pawn sacrifice, newly arrived from the Miami Herald and not bound by local traditions or religious loyalties, assigns the Spotlight unit to dig into the story. Robbie and his team that consists of reporters Michael Resendez, Mark Ruffalo, Foxcatcher, Sasha Pfeiffer, Rachel McAdams, Southpaw, and Matt Carroll, Brian Darcy James, Time Out of Mind, overseen by Deputy Managing Editor Ben Bradley Jr. John Slattery, Ant-Man, set about the nitty-gritty work of tracking down the offending clerics. Barron, however, wants to expose the systemic corruption in the church, not just individual priests and guns for top church officials such as Boston's Cardinal Bernard Law, Len Cariou, prisoners. While the case is being built step by step, the film shows how some leads go nowhere while others uncover a wider net than imagined. Coming up against the church's stonewalling, documents that have been made unavailable or have strangely disappeared, and a sleazy attorney in the D.A.'s office, Billy Crudup, Public Enemies, the team reaches out to Phil Saviano, Neil Huff, the Grand Budapest Hotel, who heads an organization dedicated to supporting abuse victims, as well as attorney Mitchell Garabedian, Stanley Tucci, Transformers, Age of Extinction, who represents victims that are suing the church in a class action lawsuit and is an important source of information. It is the interviews with the victims arranged by Garabedian that constitute some of the film's most moving moments. Especially touching is the story of Joe, beautifully performed by Michael Cyril Creighton, sleeping with other people, an openly gay man who looked up to the priest as the representative of God and felt flattered by the cleric's attention and the realization that it was okay to be gay, but only later realized the priest's culpable behavior. One of the film's best lines is when Garabedian, speaking of the agreement within the church to maintain their silence, says, "If it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one." Another impactful scene delves into the mindset of one of the offenders. In Pfeiffer's interview of ex-priest Father Ronald Paquin, Richard O'Rourke, Ghost Town, he admits to fooling around with the boys but says he never derived any pleasure from it. Undoubtedly the boys did not derive much pleasure either. One psychologist claims the priests have remained emotional pre-adolescents, but this overgeneralized speculation does not add much clarity to the debate. As the head of an outstanding ensemble cast, Michael Keaton's performance has depth and sensitivity. Ruffalo brilliantly captures the almost obsessively focused dedication of Resendez, and McAdams is able to astutely demonstrate empathy, allowing the subjects of her interviews to feel safe in expressing their feelings. McCarthy delivers the story with restraint and a balanced approach, showing the indifference of Globe reporters who sat on pertinent information they had about the scandal many years ago. While Spotlight does not have much style and can drag, the strength of its performances and the clear presentation of its subject matter has a strong impact, allowing us to feel the pain of the children who still suffer the effects of abuse, and reminds us that, as Khalil Gibran put it, safeguarding the rights of others is the most noble and beautiful end of a human being. There are several ways to review a film. Take the more celebrated route, breaking the film down to artistic wins and losses, or take the opportunity to offer a more personal approach and discuss the film and its themes. The central topic, what it means, why it's important. Spotlight is not a perfect film. There are a few orchestrated moments that don't quite gel, and some of the connections can be troublesome for Joe Public to follow, but it is a perfect opportunity to see what film can do for the human condition. This story is important. Spotlight is pretty straightforward. A team of reporters, Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, Rachel McAdams, and Brian Darcy James, for the Boston Globe are tasked with bringing the story of the Catholic Church's covering up numerous sex scandals to light. In a city where religion trumps the rule of law, this was one of the largest stories of this century. The city doesn't want it, the church doesn't want it, and most of the rest of the globe doesn't want it. Yet this gang of driven investigators are determined that the story needs to see the light of day, no matter the outcome. The acting is flawless. Keaton, Ruffalo, and Liev Schreiber, as Globe editor, Marty Baron, who started this ball rolling, all deserve to be in the Oscar conversation this year. The rest of the cast, including Stanley Tucci, Billy Crudup, and John Slattery, all stand out. As individuals, as well as an ensemble, everything works. Artistic merits aside, see Spotlight not for sheer entertainment, but for what it is trying to say. We've all seen movies like All the President's Men, where the press is shown to wield that giant spotlight on controversial issues, lighting a fire where others would walk away. What we haven't seen is why they matter today. Why should we even care? Look around you, and news has become a bastion of generic entertainment. There is nothing breaking, no monopolies crashing down because one beat reporter refused to give up on his story. Kardashians, anger combined with fleeting outrage, and of course political rhetoric, that's all there is to our news today, and we are all to blame. Every single one of us. It appears more and more that scandals are bought and paid for, swept under the rug and replaced with sensationalistic news that repeats more often than a Christmas story through the month of December. We click, they repeat. It's a vicious cycle of complacency. Spotlight is important because it reminds us what news should deliver. It brings to life that a global corporation buried their own scandals, and make no mistake, the Catholic Church is the very definition of corporation at this point. Not to mention this same church harbored known sexual predators, and they did so under the guise of the very thing that is meant to bring us all comfort and solace, faith. These reporters, these men and women brought up in a city that places the Catholic Church on an altar even if their own beliefs have waned, they risked everything to bring this story to life. Friends and family, both personal and professional relationships, all were laid on the line in order to follow every lead, track down every source, and let the public know that the system they believe so dearly in, that they devoted their very lives to, was complicit in the sexual abuse of children. Dozens of priests, hundreds of children. Director Tom McCarthy tells his story from the reporter's viewpoint, yet he does the one thing rarely done in films like these: he demonstrates the complete destruction these horrendous acts bring. The damage to a person's psyche, the eternal mistrust, the shame. McCarthy holds strong and allows the very detailed accounts to flow, not to manipulate our heartstrings, but to let it sink in what these allegations really mean. By the final credits, my own emotions were wrung out, and all I wanted was a justice so furious even God himself could not fathom it. I will not break down every nook and cranny of this film. It doesn't matter how strong the lighting is or if every shot is carefully framed. What matters is the importance of a film like Spotlight. To remind us all we should never take things at face value, our hearts should always search for the truth, and most importantly, we need the news. We need real investigative journalism to shine a light on the despicableness flourishing in the world today. Have you ever watched a movie on DVD or cable that you regret not seeing in the movie theaters? I have. In fact, I have seen at least 3 films nominated for Best Picture after they had been released on DVD. One of those films was the actual Best Picture winner, Spotlight. Directed by Oscar nominee Thomas McCarthy, Spotlight told the story of the Boston Globe's Spotlight team, the oldest continuously operating newspaper investigative journalist unit in the United States, and its investigation into cases of widespread and systemic child sex abuse in the Boston area by numerous Roman Catholic priests. The story began in 2001 when a new editor named Marty Barron is hired by the Globe. During a staff meeting, Barron brought up the subject of a Boston priest named John Geoghegan, who was sexually abusing children, and nothing was done, by the church or the city's law enforcement, to stop him. Barron urged the Spotlight team to investigate. Initially believing that they are following the story of one priest who was moved around several times, the Spotlight team eventually uncovered a pattern of sexual abuse of children by Catholic priests throughout Massachusetts and an ongoing cover-up by the Boston Archdiocese, Cardinal Bernard Law. After watching Spotlight, I easily understood why it had received a good deal of acclaim and award nominations. It really is a first-rate movie. Due to the fact that the movie focused on a newspaper investigation team, it allowed moviegoers to enjoy the team's step-by-step investigation into the priests and their victims in the Boston area. I might as well say it. The movie reminded me of the 1975 Oscar nominee, All the President's Men. And in a good way. I have not seen a really good movie about investigative journalism in a long time. I also have to commend director Thomas McCarthy and his co-writer Josh Singer for conveying the Spotlight team's discoveries via interviews and records in a well-paced manner. McCarthy did not rush the Spotlight team's investigation, but he did not drag it as well. In the end, the investigation itself struck me as a fascinating mystery that developed into a horror story that left me feeling appalled. Spotlight not only received nominations for McCarthy's direction and the screenplay that he wrote with Singer, it also received a Best Supporting Actor nomination for Mark Ruffalo and Best Supporting Actress nomination for Rachel McAdams. The pair portrayed 2 members of the Spotlight team, Michael Resendez and Sasha Pfeiffer. I will admit that both gave first-rate performances. The movie also featured excellent performances from Liev Schreiber as Marty Barron, who started the whole thing in motion, John Slattery as assistant managing editor Ben Bradley Jr., Brian Darcy James as reporter Matt Carroll, Jamie Sheridan as Catholic Church attorney Jim Sullivan, and Billy Crudup as attorney Eric McLeish. Ironically, my 2 favorite performances in the movie did not receive any Academy Award or Golden Globe nominations. One came from Stanley Tucci, who portrayed Mitchell Garabedian, a sharp-tongued attorney who represented many sexual abuse victims. I enjoyed Tucci's sardonic, yet understated performance and how his character pointed out how many Boston officials cooperated with the Catholic Church to cover up the abuses. I also enjoyed Michael Keaton's ambiguous portrayal of editor and the team's leader, Walter Robbie Robinson. Keaton did a great job in not only conveying his character's leadership, but also his knowledge that the Globe had learned about the abuses years earlier, but had covered it up. It seemed a shame that he did not receive an Academy or Golden Globe nomination. As much as I enjoyed Spotlight and was impressed by it, a part of me feels that it should not have won the Best Picture award. I think the Academy had awarded the film its top honor simply based upon its topic. The problem for me is that Spotlight simply lacked any real artistry. One might accuse me of being shallow. Perhaps I am. But I would prefer to choose a movie that not only provided a great topic, but also first-rate writing and artistry. I can think of 2 other films that were also nominated the same year as Spotlight that provided all of those features. Someone once pointed out that if you take away the movie's topic of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, Spotlight would come off as a solid, paint-by-the-numbers film by a first-time director. And you know what? That person was right. There were times when McCarthy's direction for Spotlight seemed a bit amateurish. Even though I feel that Spotlight should not have won the Best Picture Oscar for 2015, I cannot deny that it is a basically and first-rate film. I believe that this is due to its fascinating subject, the film's approach to the topic as a mystery, and the excellent cast led by Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, and Rachel McAdams. This film, directed by Tom McCarthy, written by Josh Singer, produced by Blye, Pagon, Faust, starring Mark Ruffalo, cinematography Masanobu Takayanagi, edited by Tom McCardle, music by Howard Shore, production companies Participant Media, distributed by Open Road Films, release date September 3, 2015, running time 128 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $20 million. Box office $98.7 million.